The team is already bad enough when they step out onto the pitch every single week, but now even when these guys aren't on the field, I have to worry that something new is going to happen because every single day, the club finds more and more ways to drag down the mental health of its fans. It's getting to the point where what do we even tell rival fans? The majority of the time, they're right when they're speaking about United. See, the last time I talked about the club, it had been about a month and a half since Amorim had come in. At that point, even though there was an inconsistency in the form department, there was at least a hope that in a month or two, maybe some of the guys would step up to the plate and at least provide enough for us to drag ourselves out of a relegation battle. Well, here we are, a few months down the line, and I can confirm that we've gone from 14th place down to 15th. There's just no end in sight for the misery that this football club brings to me. The only positive really is that I think we're not going down, mostly because our rivals in Leicester City, Southampton, and Ipswich are dropping points like nobody's business. We're getting a point here and there, so that's at least helping our case to stay in the league. I will say we have a massive 6-pointer at the point of this recording against Ipswich coming up, so let's see how that goes. Also, the fact that we beat Arsenal in the cup is nice. I will say that. Even at our worst, we could still beat Arsenal and prevent them from winning a trophy. You gotta love that as a United fan. But nonetheless, the reality is that we stink. On and off the pitch. It's really an embarrassment. And you might be thinking to yourself as a hater or as a fellow United fan, why? Why does Manchester United stink? Well, let me break it down for you. But real quick, if you enjoy the misery of a United fan or just like watching football videos in general, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you don't miss an upload. We drop weekly football videos on the channel. And if you're not new around here, boys, welcome back. Glad to have you around for another video. With that being said, boys, let's get into the curious case as to why Manchester United is an embarrassment of a club. So I'd say the most obvious reason as to why United is considered an embarrassment is the fact that we couldn't win a game even if the other team decided to not show up. It's really gotten to the point where most United fans don't go into a single game confident, regardless of if we're playing the top of the table or the bottom. In the last 2 months that I've avoided talking about this team on the channel, United had racked up an impressive 6 wins, 2 draws, and 4 losses. And now you might be thinking to yourself on the screen that you're watching this video on, that isn't even that bad of a run. Your club has more wins than losses. And to that, I'd say technically you're right, but shut up. Only one of those 5 wins was in the Premier League. The rest of the victories came in the cup competitions where the lingering spirit of Erik ten Hag allowed for these guys to lock in and progress to the next round, as he would have liked to get done if he was still here. The guy was a cup competition magician. And even then, the only win that we got in the Prem, which was against Fulham, felt like a fluke of a victory that still showcased so many flaws. United played terribly that game, and thanks to a heavily deflected shot from Martinez, we were able to come out on top. In contrast to that stat, every single draw and loss has been in the Premier League. It has been, as I'm saying again, a massively embarrassing run of games for the club. The only game within those losses and draws where United showed even a semblance of a decent performance was the draw against Liverpool. And honestly, that's just because these players choose to only show up and play when they're considered the underdog. Every other game where on paper United would have been considered a favorite and should have dominated the ball, the team came out and just put up a cowardly performance. In the most recent game against Everton, we saw how it wasn't until the team was 2-0 down where the players actually decided to care and try to win the game. And this was with just 30 minutes left in the match. This has been a common theme in all of the games this season, whether it was with Ten Hag or Ruud van Nistelrooy in a 4 at the back, or with Amorim in a 3 in the back. These guys just don't play with the quality you expect from a Premier League team, let alone a Manchester United side. The recent losses to Crystal Palace and Spurs have really compounded this because it's quickly become a situation where we have to question who we can even beat in the league. The players, as I've mentioned before, are just not good enough and really need to leave the club at some point or another. It's all good and fun giving players time to adapt and all that good stuff, but players like Højlund have just not been good enough. He hasn't scored in so many games. He's a striker in the Premier League and the guy can't score a goal. Forget the fact that he's playing for United. The guy can't score a goal to save his life in the Premier League. And that's just one example of players that just have not been up to the standard of playing in the league. And the crazy part is a major reason why we have a big chunk of these players that just aren't good enough. It's just due to the fact that the new owners who have taken control of the footballing side of things are just incompetent and greedy. As many of you are probably tired of hearing, another reason why United suck aside from results is due to the Ineos and the project that has been going on since the summer. See, the Glazer family sold off a portion of the club to Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos, who came in under the pretense that they were going to finally instill a footballing brain into a club that was previously run by bankers. And since then, it's just been failure after failure after failure. Or should I say embarrassment after embarrassment. But to start off with the embarrassments that Ineos has brought amongst us United United fans. These guys in the summer interviewed multiple candidates for the managerial position, as it was clear that Ten Hag was not the right fit for the club going forward after last season. After doing their rounds, which included interviews with a certain Ruben Amorim, they ultimately decided to extend Ten Hag's contract for another year. This would prove to be a massive failure, as they would go on to spend 214 million euros on signings that for the most part were meant for Ten Hag, greatly adding fuel to a fire that we'll touch on in just a second. As we all know, Ten Hag was sacked this season, so now you have all these dud signings who hardly fit into any manager's plan. On top of this, after a few months of terrible performances in cycling managers, Ineos would announce that they wanted to raise ticket prices. This is just a little bit of a value 101 here for these multi-million, billion-dollar business owners. If you're not giving better value proposition, why are you raising the price? It doesn't make sense. The team isn't improving, the structure isn't improving, the recruiting hasn't improved, so why are you raising ticket prices? These guys were trying to find every single way possible to generate more funds for the club, which makes sense because you're a business, but the way they were going about it was just the worst possible ideas. This included firing staff and making changes behind the scene, all in efforts to cut costs and salvage some revenue. And I don't mean like firing a player and saving thousands of dollars in wages. I mean firing the backroom staff, the guys who are just there to work their job at probably a club that they love to even work at. And next up on the list of dumb stuff that Ineos has done, in December they would sack the director of football Dan Ashworth, as there was growing concerns on if he would be the man to really push the club forward. After all, it would be Dan Ashworth who ultimately decided to keep Ten Hag at the club. Definitely a crime worthy of the sacking punishment, but this sacking would cost the club 4.1 million euros, and add that to the 5 million euros they had paid to take him from Newcastle in the first place, and it gets even more embarrassing. And since this has happened, the club have announced more and more cost-cutting measures, and by that I mean firing more staff and feeding everyone the same food that was being served in Nacho Libre. And I'm not gonna lie, I saw this news report and I kind of felt like I had to make this video, because this is getting ridiculous. Why can't United just, I don't know, maybe decide to terminate contracts that are costing millions of euros when they could just make sure that Steve from the janitorial services can't eat good food anymore? So on top of making bonehead decisions for the managerial position, on top of cutting costs and firing staff that probably didn't deserve to be fired, on top of raising ticket prices, they've also pretty much left Ruben Amorim to drown. And it would have been the same for any other manager that came in, because despite having the opportunity to bring the guy in the summer, where he would have been able to at least get some players that fit the system that he's used to, or at least players that are familiar with it, they decided to keep Ten Hag and wait until the squad was drowning to try and fix it. Amorim was brought in for his style of play and the way that he does things on a football pitch, but was given a squad that is incapable of playing his way. And yes, it's kind of a two-way street, right? Amorim took the job, he knew what he was signing up for, but at the end of the day, if the club would have just signed him in the summer, he would have been in a much better position than he's in now. And you could say that the January transfer window that we just had was an opportunity for maybe the club to finally bring in some players to help Amorim out a little bit, get him some good deals. But aside from Patrick Dorgu, the players never came. Mind you, Ineos and the club allowed for guys like Antony and Rashford to leave on loan without a plan to get replacements in, meaning our only attacking options are Garnacho, Xerxes, a 67-year-old coach, and Rasmus Højlund. Tell me that doesn't instill fear in the heart of all defenders in the Premier League. They essentially shoved Amorim in the deep end of the pool and left him to drown. It's absolutely ridiculous. But sadly, another embarrassing factor that contributed to the fact that we didn't even bring anyone in the winter window is the fact that the club is broke. After years of not winning the Prem and missing Champions League every other year, the club for the most part has struggled to find any funds to get deals done. Players on massive wages need to leave the club, and while we like to hope for a big exodus this summer, it's probably going to be hard to pack some of these guys up. I'm glad we're at least seeing Rashford and Antony do well on their loan spells outside of United, because that'll actually raise their value once they are back if they do end up being sold. And to be fair, we do run this we're broke gimmick pretty much every single year, and we still end up spending a ton of cash in the summer, but this time it does feel like maybe the club might have gone just a little bit overboard this last summer, and that might have been all the cash that we had left. Of course, it's going to be interesting to see, but the fact that this winter window, when Amorim really needed players, we needed a striker, we needed a new center mid, we needed wing backs, the club just pretty much sat on its hands and there was nothing we could do because we didn't have the money, which again comes down to the fact that the club had just made so many bonehead decisions. Appoint a different manager at the appropriate time, and all that money could have been invested into a new system and players that actually know what they're doing on the pitch. And last but not least, the thing that could really cement the fact that this is an absolute clown show would be if Amorim is sacked before the season is over. And hear me out, I know it sounds a little bit crazy, but it's definitely a possibility. I'm not saying Amorim out. I actually like the guy. I hope they back him. I hope he stays at least. I'm not fully sold on him, but he's only been here for a handful of months. Let's see after a year and a half, of course. But there's a chance he gets sacked. The results have just not not been there. Of course, like I said, on paper, he's gotten us from 14th down to 15th, and we've been losing a ton of games in the league and only really winning outside of the Premier League. But outside of that, just watching the team play, the performances, the coaching aspect, it's just not there, and the team is suffering greatly. The players that we're playing week in and week out just cannot cope, and yes, part of it is Amorim because he's not good enough to coach these guys into playing his system, and the other part of it is the players not being capable of pretty much doing anything. They failed playing under Ten Hag's system, and now they're failing under Amorim's. What a surprise. But tactically, every single week we're getting exposed by whatever manager's coming up against Amorim. I know there's Sporting fans who've come out and said it's gonna be tough, Amorim needs his players, it's not gonna be pretty, but we don't know if the board's gonna have that same exact patience. There's a chance United go on and maybe win the FA Cup, maybe we win Europa League, and then going into the next season is a lot more positive than what's going on now, but we have no idea if that's gonna happen. On the other side of the coin, if we go on to sustain the losing streak and it gets ugly, then it might not be looking good for Amorim. And if you think I'm being ridiculous, don't forget Chelsea signed Graham Potter just to sack him before the season was over. And yes, Chelsea historically is a lot more trigger happy with their managers, but this was under a new regime. This wasn't under Roman Abramovich. This was the Clear Lake Todd Bowley era. The guy didn't even get a full season because he and Chelsea were drowning, and the same thing could happen. And that, on top of everything, on top of being 15th place, top of firing the director of football, top of all these cost-cutting measures, would really just be the cherry on top. Do I think it's gonna happen? No. It seems like the club somewhat actually want to back the guy in the summer, but of course, time will tell. We have no idea what's gonna happen. But altogether, this season has just been a shit show. Who is even to blame at this point? Because Ten Hag killed us in the beginning of the season. The players have been terrible under two different managers now. Rival fans like to clown on Amorim, but these are the same players that were failing and drowning in the 4-in-the-back system. These guys were 13th, 14th place in a 4-in-the-back. Of course, you're gonna be in a 3-in-the-back as well. You can blame the board for keeping Ten Hag in and not getting a manager sooner and not getting their new manager more signings in the winter. You can blame Amorim for not being good enough of a coach to get these guys playing decent football and defending well enough. You can blame the fans for not letting go of the past and still thinking United is super upper echelon, even though the fact that we're fighting in a relegation battle. All I can do at this point is hope that we win the Europa League by some miracle and that we don't get relegated. Otherwise, I'm gonna get familiar with championship teams pretty quickly.